We're gonna talk today about influencers and starting a business regulated by the FDA. Some of the things that people should know. Just by way of introduction, I'm Heather Bustos. I'm the managing partner of Bustos Law Group, and this is my lovely co-host Lisa Capote. She is managing partner, CEO of Capote Law Firm, and we're both FDA compliance attorneys. So really, the goal here is how can we kind of guide anyone in the influencer space, when it comes to starting their own business. Obviously, there's some benefits to being an influencer and starting your own business from the get-go. You have a community that is loyal to you, and so they'll be loyal to your brand. But really, how do we, maximize that ability to, bring that community with you to a new brand and into a space that you may not have experience with? So really the first thing I wanted to get into was kind of, and Lisa, if you want to share some of your experience working with influencers. I know that I've had a few clients in that space, and maybe you can talk about just your experience thus far working with those kinds of clients.
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest issues influencers end up having is they don't realize that they don't know what they don't know, right? And they've built this fantastic brand without having a product line, and now they want to convert it into dollars. And converting it into dollars usually means hiring a business manager, and that business manager may not have the experience in an FDA regulated industry. So trying to be proactive with hiring the right team, whether on an ongoing basis or on a case by case basis, is important, right? That business manager may be fantastic for marketing purposes, but may not know the subtle nuances or the registration requirements under FDA. So ensuring that if it's a cosmetic, if it's a supplement, if it's a food, anything that regulates under FDA, and FDA's got such a broad range of products that you hire and that you make sure that your manager is hiring the right team to support that brand, because you don't want to go to market and have your brand look poorly from the beginning of launching this new product simply because you didn't know what you were doing. You have to issue a recall.
Right. And I think one of the questions that comes up a lot is, how do you determine whether you need to hire internally, find someone external that you can kind of have on call? Is there kind of a rule that you would go by, or something you would advise those businesses on?
I think a lot of it has to do with dollars and budget. Most startups and the beginning phase of any companies launching a new product, there really isn't the need to have somebody in-house. Most of the companies that I've seen have somebody in-house on an ongoing basis are usually above 20 million and have a full product line that they're handling and need to review marketing material on an ongoing basis, new product launches, things of that nature. But if you've got 3 or 4 products and you're going to dedicate yourself to those 3 or 4 products for the next 3 or 4 years with similar marketing material, then you're not going to need somebody in-house to review that, even if you are at the 20 million, simply because you're not making enough modifications for you to justify spending that kind of money. But I'd take a look at it, right? If you're spending 100, 200,000 on an external individual when you can hire somebody in-house for less money, it would make more sense at that point in time. But in the beginning, no, I don't think you really need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and we talked about it, like you already kind of touched on it, is having someone initially review all your stuff, and then you're going to have things that kind of come up over time. What are some things, and obviously, as you're going through that process, like let's say you're a brand owner, you're an influencer, you're starting from the base level, you don't know what you're doing. What would you say are some of the steps that you think are important to consider initially, and then obviously we can expand upon those in a little more detail.
I think you need to first figure out what federal agency is going to regulate you,
Yeah,
first and foremost, right? And
absolutely.
if you have a business plan, providing that business plan to whoever is going to help you, right? Because that business plan is going to tell Heather and I both whether or not you're going to be storing this product. Are you going to use a 3PL to run the product? how are you going to be putting that product now and 5 years from now? So you might be starting online exclusively right now, but what happens if you decide you want to go brick and mortar in the future? Are you going to go brick and mortar, your own brick and mortar? Are you going to utilize CVS, Walgreens, Walmart? And if so, each of those retailers is going to have different requirements that you're going to have to comply with. But first and foremost, who regulates you? Somebody always does. There is a catch-all always. When all else fails, consumer product safety will catch your product.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to.
Yeah,
Have
absolutely.
you found?
Right. And I think from that point, if we're kind of talking the order of things, so let's say at that point you determine that it's FDA. So we'll give a hypothetical of a cosmetic, which with influencers, that's a really big space. It's a really easy space to move into, I think, in comparison to other FDA regulated spaces. You have Kylie, you have Huda Beauty, you have Glossier. Those are all influencer brands in the cosmetic space. So let's say you determine FDA regulates me. Now, the next steps, what would you say are the next considerations that need to be made?
So once you've determined that FDA regulates you, you need to decide whether or not you're going to figure out what those regulations are, or you're going to have somebody educate you on those regulations, or you're just going to have somebody that you're going to hire to make sure that you're following those regulations.
Right.
So how are you going to figure out what those rules are?
Right. And I think too, and then you get into like the questions of like we've talked about in the past, like manufacturing. Are we gonna do, picking a contract manufacturer is huge because, I think a lot of people tend to move into the space and they think, okay, I just own the brand. My responsibility is marketing the brand, making sure that people in the world know my name, but they don't really understand the responsibilities over their manufacturer, over, like you said, their 3PL, over quality. Like all of those things are really important. So let's go step by step. So if you're, for instance, you're going to start looking at a manufacturer, right? And you want to try to figure out what would be some things. Let's start with what would be some red flags if you were looking at manufacturers that would kind of stick out to you that maybe you shouldn't go with this one.
So we're going to stick with cosmetic because that's relatively easy.
Yeah.
When it comes to supplements and foods, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and you should be more specific and more intentional when it comes to those contract manufacturers. Cosmetic manufacturers, the red flags for my clients have always been commercial in nature, right? Quality is helpful. The reality is FDA has recommended quality requirements, but they don't have mandated quality requirements.
Right.
Now, if you've built a brand, you want to make sure that you have some level of quality.
Yeah.
So if you are talking with a contract manufacturer, and they have zero policies and procedures in place for managing contaminations, for managing recalls, for managing customer complaints or client complaints, those are immediate red flags. I have been to contract manufacturers that they don't have anything. They have no procedures, and they say, here's the formula, and I have a tank, and I put X amount of this product, and I put X amount of that product, and I put them in the tank, and I mix them for 5 minutes. Sometimes I mix them for 10, sometimes I mix them for 15. Well, what does that change in mixing? Does that affect the product? Is the product going to be different at that point in time? These things, it's important. It's important that your manufacturer does have steps and how they manufacture, and that all of that is in writing so that they're following the same procedure time and time again, and so that their employees are following the same procedure time and time again. Because a lot of the individuals that you're going to find on the production lines, they are lower level individuals who they're given a set of instructions, they're supposed to follow it, and it's repetitive. But if they're given the wrong set of procedures from the beginning, then they're going to be making the wrong formula every single time. Right. So having it in writing is really important. Another red flag, check FDA's website, see if they've been inspected. If they do combination products, so if they don't just do cosmetics, if they also manufacture drugs, they may have been inspected by FDA. And any FDA warning letters or 483s will help you. 483s are observations that FDA issues after an inspection. Any of those reports will help you gain a better idea of what their quality systems are like. I'd also figure out what their reputation is like. I'm currently dealing with a client who they can't even get their initial order because the contract manufacturer is giving them pushback.
Yeah.
And you've established a brand, you've spent money marketing this launch of the new product. You have customers who are ready, willing, and able to purchase your product, and you don't have product on hand because you're having a commercial dispute with your manufacturer. It's
Yep.
really important to see what's their financial viability. Have they been around for years, or did they set up shop yesterday? Are the people who are running it experienced in that area? Or is it a banker who decided today they were going to go into manufacturing cosmetics,
Right.
right? Do they have the know-how? And if they don't have the know-how, have they hired the know-how?
Right. Yeah, I think too, looking at whether they have quality agreements, those types of documents up front is a really good sign. I'm not saying that it's the only thing you need to look at, but I think that that shows the manufacturer has taken into consideration quality and understands the regulatory requirements. So that's something really important. And we're having a conversation about contract manufacturers and how important. I think for influencers it's doubly important because you're bringing that community, you're bringing that loyalty with you. So the minute you launch that product, you've got a following that's going to give their opinion right away. Unlike some other brand owners that may come on the scene and no one really knows they exist. And if something goes wrong, they can kind of slink back into the shadows. Whereas if you're an influencer, there's so much more at stake because of the reputation. And I've seen where I've seen brand owners, like you said, on the front end where let's say they can't get their first order, but I've seen also where things go wrong and the contract manufacturer doesn't want to take responsibility. They don't want to do what's required. They don't want to do investigations. And then you're having to chase after them. So I think it's on all fronts having that agreement up front so that there's some culpability when things go wrong is really important. And I guess moving to the next piece. So with contract manufacturing, obviously there's quality, all of that. If a brand was looking at their packaging, is that something you would recommend they have under the contract manufacturer, finding an external party to do that? I get that question a lot.
It all depends, right? The contract manufacturer will usually have a relationship with a packaging company that can provide you better rates. But if you're looking for a very unique package, you may not have a choice. They may not be able to offer it through their traditional packaging company. And remember that most of these packaging companies, most of these contract manufacturers are dealing with distributors. They're not even going direct to the source with the packaging company. So there's another layer there that you have to be concerned with. Now, if you want more control, you can definitely reach out and get your own packaging company. But again, it's going to cost you more. And you're depending on the type of product that you're dealing in, you may now open yourself up to more FDA requirements
Yeah.
if you're the one in charge of sourcing packaging materials. For example, if you're dealing in a supplement and that supplement's going to have an expiration date on it, and you're purchasing a specific type of bottle, your job when that bottle comes in is to make sure that what you ordered is what was sent to you. So you have to weigh it, you have to measure it, you have to check the certificate of compliance that they send along with it to make sure that it is the material that you actually ordered. And you have to document all of that for FDA purposes.
Yeah.
So rather than go through all of that, your contract manufacturer should have those procedures already in house. So a lot of times it's a lot easier to let them handle it.
Yeah, and I think also using external parties can hold up lead times. Like it can do a lot of damage in certain cases when you're trying to bring together all these parties to kind of fill these roles. So I agree. With at least if there's a possibility to keep it in-house. What about labeling? That's something that we both represent manufacturers. We also represent brand owners. If you are a brand owner, what should you consider when it comes to labeling? And it's not just like you said, the packaging, the actual physical material, but the content of the labeling.
So there's so much to consider when it comes
Yeah.
to labeling. One of the things when I first talk to a client, I ask is, how are you marketing this product? Are you going exclusively online, or are you going to do a combination online and retail, brick and mortar, Or are
Yeah.
you going to go exclusively brick and mortar? If you're going to go exclusively brick and mortar, you need to sell via that label. So that label needs to convey what the product is, what its purpose is. So you need to add more to that label, which means you need to be a little bit riskier with the claims that you make on that label.
Yeah.
Versus if you're selling online, you can make your label clean, minimize the claims on the label so that if there's an issue with the label in the future, you don't have to relabel it because you have no claims or you have minimal claims. And make your marketing pitch via your website or via your Amazon page, whatever online store you're utilizing to sell that product. So that's one thing that you need to take in consideration. How are you selling the product? And then based on how you're selling the product will dictate what you're going to put on that label. The other thing you need to take into consideration is contract manufacturers may have experience with what needs to go on the label, but a lot of times they don't want to take on the liability.
Right.
They'll tell you you need to put net contents on the front of the label. But when it comes to signing off on the final label, guess what, brand owner? You're responsible.
Yeah.
You need to sign off on it. It's not our problem. So you need to have the ability, either internal or somebody you hire external, to review and make sure that it's all compliant with FDA regulations.
Right, absolutely. So if we're continuing to go through the decision-making process, which I think, like you said, as a brand owner, when you're first sitting down to determine how all this is going to work, really like sketching out how that supply chain is going to run. You can always have an idea, but then people like Lisa and I are going to maybe shatter some of your dreams on the way you want to structure your supply chain because it may not work that way. But I think with a startup, there's always going to be different strategy versus dealing with an established company. With startups, my goal is, okay, how can we get you started, as quickly as possible with as least money in it as possible, the least amount of regulatory requirements. There might be like exemptions, things like that. And then obviously you can build on that. So you can build your capital, and then as you build, you may end up in a different arena from a regulatory perspective. So we went through kind of the contract manufacturer, the labeling, packaging. So now the next part is the distribution. So determining, what's the best way to distribute. And I know for myself with a lot of startup companies, I talk about like, hey, maybe go through a 3PL, try to push that off. What are some pros and cons to doing that kind of structure? And I know it's becoming more popular, that you've seen dealing with 3PLs.
And I use the acronym as well. And
Yeah.
we're both so used to using
Third
acronyms.
party. Yeah.
We
You're right.
assume third party logistics company. That's either
Yeah.
your UPS, your DHL, your FedExes, or there's private ones. And in fact, even Amazon's now doing fulfillment beyond just Amazon selling on their website. So they have a whole separate company that will do 3PL services. So from a 3PL services, that means the product's usually going directly from the contract manufacturer into a third party's warehouse, and that third party will handle distribution, whether it's distribution to an online retailer like Amazon, distribution to a brick and mortar retailer, or some of them will do direct to consumer for you. And the flip side of that is doing it yourself, having the product sent over to your own warehouse where you'll have somebody there who can ship to Amazon or who can ship to the consumers, whatever the case may be. Pros and cons of using the third party logistic company goes back to regulatory as well, right? There are certain requirements when you have product that you're storing, and the third party logistics companies are all complying with that, or so you should hope, right? And they should already have the mechanisms in place to be able to move your product quickly and have electronic tracking mechanisms. All of these things that you would have to put in yourself should you be doing it in-house. On the flip side, it's going to cost you more money. It costs you more money to hire a third-party logistics company versus hiring somebody at $20 an hour to be at your facility full time. In addition to that, you're beholden to them and their time frame. So if the logistics company says, when you put in an order with us, it's going to be a 24-hour turnaround time, there's nothing you can do to speed that up. You are beholden to that 24-hour time frame versus if you have a warehouse with somebody who's there and you have a customer who wants it today, you can get that employee, pull that employee from whatever they're doing and get them to ship it out immediately.
Right. Yeah, and I think the cost is a big thing, but it's funny because I do have a lot of clients who say like, no, no, I'll have my warehouse. I already know where I'm going to put it. And they may not really understand like the amount of requirements they'll have. Again, if we're going like in order, and we also deal with medical devices, like that's obviously a really higher level OTC drugs, higher level. But I mean, food can be a pretty high level too, and so can supplements.
You can go
So
even more basic
yeah,
than that. Not even talking regulatory.
yeah.
Do you have a forklift? Is your warehouse ground level, or is it at a level that a shipping truck can pull in with its trailer so you can just drive in?
Yeah.
If you don't have a raised bay, then how are you going to get that product? Do you have appropriate shelving in your facility? And this is cosmetic supplements, whatever the case may be.
Anything,
Do
yeah.
you have a trucking company when you need to ship out pallets? Because UPS, unless you're doing ground and unless you have a commercial relationship with them, is not going to pick up pallets from you. But
Yeah.
you may need somebody like an R&L transport company to come out and pick up your pallets for you.
Right.
Um, what is the maximum amount of boxes per product that can be palletized? Do you have saran wrap for pallets to make sure that if you have to change the size of the pallets for a particular company because they ordered more, they ordered less than a pallet, do you have the way to pack that pallet?
Yeah.
There's also requirements for pallets from an import standpoint. So if your pallet's coming in, is it a wood pallet? Has the wood pallet been treated?
Yeah.
Things of this nature
Absolutely.
that when you have your own warehouse, you don't even think of. The minute you have a forklift, now you have OSHA requirements and you have to train that employee on that forklift.
Right.
So it can be done and it can be done for cheaper in the long haul. And I have lots of clients who have their own warehouse, but it's something that you need to take into consideration. And I find that most of my influencer clients, that's not where their business is. Their
Right.
business is their brand and building their brand, and building a warehouse doesn't make sense for them because it doesn't directly impact their brand.
Right. And I think, and this is something I was thinking about is kind of having almost like a board of directors. When you're a brand owner, you have your board of directors and you have your different people that are specializing in different areas. You definitely need to have, if you're in an FDA regulated space, someone with regulatory background that's going to guide, because I've seen so many times where there isn't a regulatory person that's guiding, and then there's decisions that are made, and it's by the time they come to me, I'm like, well, you shouldn't have done that, or you could, that wasn't something that I would have advised, and then they have to kind of backtrack. So I think regulatory people think of it as like a final step, when in reality it's actually the step that's going to help you make your decisions in a better way. And like you said, most people don't think about it, they think of the business side. And like you said as well, influencers' jobs are to market. That their job is not to know the regulatory. So having some kind of a team that you can go to, that you specify, this is my person for my finance, this is my person, just like any other business. But as an influencer, having a regulatory person on that team, I think is really vital, to the success of the company, and understanding the requirements. Um,
Absolutely. And you touched on something that I really don't think that enough of our clients focus on, which is getting us involved at the R&D stage. If you
yeah,
can get us at the R&D stage, we can help you avoid those pitfalls. I've had clients who have to scrap entire labels, a whole shipment of labels, because I was involved at a post printing standpoint.
yep. No,
Or you've gone through all
yeah,
of this R&D and you're ready to go, okay, Lisa, we have this great idea. Here's our idea. We already put hundreds of dollars into R&D on this. And I turn around and say, well, you're not going to be able to do it because the regulations don't allow you to have this ingredient. And that is your linchpin of an
yeah,
ingredient.
your main
Turning around,
ingredient.
oh wait, great! I wasted 6 months of everybody's time putting together this great new product, and I couldn't even do it when Lisa could have told me that from day one.
Yeah, no, and let's not even begin to get into the situations where I've walked in and I'm like, your business can't even exist because like what you're doing from start to finish, like what your product is based on, just it's not, you're not able to do it compliantly. It's impossible. So it's either you're going to just take the full amount of risk, which at that point, your hands are behind your back. So, and I have had that happen and it got very uncomfortable very quick where I'm just like, I have to be honest with you, like this product cannot even exist the way that you're doing it. There's just no way. And I had a conversation with a client recently who is not an influencer. They did get an influencer to kind of make comments about the product, so they kind of went viral in that way. And the statement that was made is, well, when we were first starting, like compliance wasn't really a big deal, but now like we really want to take it seriously. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of things that we're gonna have to do to clean all this up because it's a mess, And so I think, like you said, getting that regulatory advice, even an hour phone call, like just pay for the hour and we'll give you the information. We'll do a checklist of the things you need, or at least tell you like, my gut is you can't really do this, I may need some more research, but even that is enough to kind of help guide, down the right path, I think. So
Back
going
to that
back to,
director, right? Getting people on your board of directors
yeah,
to who have all of these different areas, so that from the beginning, you're
yeah,
turning around and that board of directors is being told, this is what we want to do.
yeah.
What do you think? And they can opine, and regulatory can say yay or nay, move forward.
Yeah. And I have brands, and it's, there's part of it is like the advice standpoint. But for instance, like with the labels, I have companies who first the label goes to the marketing agency, then the label goes through legal, then the label goes through, the owner and what they think of it. And then it makes circles around, and like having that team at your disposal, you're going to have all the checks and balances you need versus, well, it looks pretty, like the marketing people, there are some that do know some requirements, regulatory requirements, but you're never going to get like the full knowledge base that you're going to get with someone that only specializes, so if someone ever asks me like, does this look pretty, I don't know, but does it meet the requirements, I can tell you that, and that would be like my role on that board of directors. So I've seen it, like I said, in practice, and I think it works really well to kind of pass it along those chains. So going back to, we were talking about the warehouse, and what kind of came up in my brain is the registration question. And I get this all the time because people tend to think that all I need is registration, and registration is the end all be all. And a lot of people, especially, a lot of foreign companies, they come from, places like, I know Dubai, for instance, it's very rigorous. You have to submit your product and do testing and all this stuff. What is, from your perspective, I know the answer to this, but I want to hear your perspective on what is registration? Why is it important? What do people, get wrong when they talk about registration from an FDA perspective?
So depends on the product, right? Always
Yeah.
the same.
Always the
From
same answer. Yep.
the cosmetic standpoint, right? Registration is voluntary, and I'm an advocate on, if it's voluntary, don't do it. Why open yourself up to something that is unnecessary? So cosmetic, no registration. The rest of them, when you register with FDA, unlike the majority of the countries that I've dealt with, Central and South America, EU, Middle East, they do it backwards. FDA says you register with us, and at that point in time, you need to make sure that you have your procedures and that you are compliant with the regulations that apply to your industry.
Yep.
And we're going to come visit you. We don't know when. It might be 3 months, it might be in 3 years, but we're going to visit you eventually. And when
Yeah.
we come visit you, if you don't have your regulations, if you're not following your regulations, you don't have your procedures in place, then at that point in time, we're going to issue you an observations, and you need to handle that. And it becomes costly when those observations end up being numerous, right? So the expectation and the assumption that is from FDA's standpoint, the moment you register, you have everything in place to be a compliant facility. and whatever everything in place means for your particular category.
Yeah.
And what I see time and time again with most of my clients is, let me rephrase that. Not with most of my clients, with some of my clients,
Yeah.
they go ahead and they do exactly that. Registration is the end all be all. And then once they do registration, they don't have to worry about anything else. And they don't bother to have policies and procedures in place. And they don't bother to conduct internal audits or supplier audits. And they just register, and FDA shows up at their doorsteps and they're freaking out because what do I do now? FDA's here and I don't have anything. And how do I get everything in place? And there's no way you can get everything in place in that amount of time. You just have to take the hits and the observations that are going to come and deal with the interruption to business. Because whenever FDA shows up, it is an interruption to business. It is simply how much of an interruption. Is it going to be a month-long interruption? Because between FDA being there, you responding to FDA, you implementing everything you need to do after that inspection, or is it going to be a 2-week interruption, right? And the goal should always be minimize it as much as possible because it costs you money at that point in time. You're running your business, you're going great, and you've got it on in a flow, and everybody's happy, and clients and customers are happy, and your brand is building every day like it's supposed to be building. And then all of a sudden, you come to a screeching halt because FDA showed up at your door.
Yeah. And I think too, quality, we can look at it from the regulatory perspective, but ultimately it's going to be beneficial to the company, right? You're going to create a reputation for yourself where everyone knows your quality is top notch. You put your certifications on your website, you have that following that also is going to stay loyal because they're going to believe in the brand. They're going to know that the reputation for quality is there. Versus what is the bare minimum of what I need. I get that a lot. And I'm not saying there aren't cases where I'm willing to go there again in the startup phase, things like that. But if you're willing to go above and beyond, that's just going to be beneficial for your brand ultimately, I think, and reputation. Um,
And
yeah, go
from
ahead.
the influencer standpoint, right? A lot of the clients that I have coming to me that are influencers have developed a reputation for either knowing their way around products that are not harmful,
Yep.
or products that are healthy, or products that are organic, right? They've developed this niche for quality product already. You're out there on the internet, on your social media, promoting other people's products because they're quality products. If it's a cosmetic, and it's color cosmetics because they last, and because they don't use X, Y, and Z color additives, right? So you've already built that reputation. You want to make sure that you carry that reputation to your product. So if suddenly you get a contract manufacturer that isn't following quality, or you don't have those quality procedures in place, it will harm your brand, a brand that you've already set up, because then your product's not in line with what you've been preaching for years or months or whatever amount of time you've been building this brand.
Absolutely. And I've seen it happen a few years ago, had an influencer come to me and, I kind of went through that laundry list of what I think that they would need. They ultimately didn't move forward. And I'm not saying that's the reason, but they ended up, I guess, going with a really bad contract manufacturer that just didn't do the right things. And ultimately their reputation like went completely down because they just didn't have the quality, that they had been known for as an influencer. It didn't translate into their brand. I guess on the registration part. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, what a registration is, like what is the definition of a registration so that people understand you're not submitting your product to FDA. You're not, taking it for testing. Those are all of the quality stuff you're keeping in house, which means you need to hire somebody to review all your stuff and make sure you're compliant. What does a registration actually do? Like, what is the purpose of it? What is not the purpose, but what is the physical act of registering?
All it is notification. You're
Yeah.
just telling FDA, hey, I'm out here. This is where I'm located. This is who you need to talk to. And this is what we're producing, or this is what we're storing, or this is the product line that we're in. That's all it is. It is not an FDA approval. It is not an FDA recognition of anything.
Right.
And fact, FDA has issued statements that just because you're FDA registered, you shouldn't put that on your labeling or on your marketing material because you are making an implied claim that we have somehow stamped FDA approval on here, when
Right.
in fact, it's nothing more than just a notification. That's
Right.
all it is.
Right. And generally applies to a facility, right? To a place, not to the product itself, not to the brand. So that's really important to understand. And I think what you were touching on earlier is FDA, and I use this a lot, is reactive rather than proactive. So instead of coming and reviewing your stuff, they're really going to just react, and you really don't know when or where they're going to come from. And so, the important part is starting from the very beginning, starting with that mindset of compliance, quality. You think about like planting a seed, you want to make sure like you're not planting it too close to the sidewalk, you're not planting it in a place where when it starts to grow, the roots are just going to get tangled. Like you want to start from a fresh place, and that's where compliance, I think, really needs to start, is at the time of, at that seedling stage.
I agree.
So let's think about some other topics for influencers. I guess the marketing part. I mean, that's we touched a little bit about claims. We could probably talk like on
Hours.
hours and hours about claims. But that is something that, obviously influencers, they know about marketing, but they may not really understand what the bounds are when it comes to FDA regulation. Maybe we can dive into a couple different industries and then see like what are some of the common things. So for instance, let's start with cosmetics. Like what are some things that might happen from a claims perspective that we want influencers to understand?
Cosmetics is usually where you get into trouble with claims, right?
Yeah.
Time and time again. Cosmetic companies and brands want to get us to believe that the product can be the equivalent of Botox,
Right.
right? And time again, FDA has said absolutely not, right? You can make claims about affecting the appearance of wrinkles, but the moment you say that it will remove wrinkles, you're suddenly into a drug claim, and FDA will hit you with either a warning letter or, depending if they find it from an inspection during a 483, right?
Yeah.
And we go back to the same thing. This is all about building your brand.
Yeah.
Getting a warning letter in some industries is not a big deal. It's a letter from FDA that says you're not compliant, fix it. You have 15 days to respond to us. And you go and you respond to them and you fix it. The problem is that all of this gets posted online. And along with it is your company name, your product name, the CEO, and the website if it's coming off of a website. So
Yep.
now out there is bad publicity for you. The regulatory agency that's in charge of overseeing your product has said your product is not compliant.
Right.
And I wish that FDA would use nice, pretty words like saying, hey, you're making claims about wrinkle remover, when you should have simply said minimizes the appearance of fine lines and wrinkles, right? But they don't say that. They say these really scary legalese because they're taking the language directly out of the regulation, and the regulations have to apply to all products. So
Yeah.
then they talk about misbranded products.
Mhm. Oh yeah, it's scary.
Oh, that's some scary stuff. And all
Yeah.
it is simple as a claim issue, right? But again, we're back to the same. You've built a reputation, you've built a brand, and now you're going to adversely affect that brand because of something as silly as not knowing the subtle nuances of helps with the appearance of wrinkles versus removes wrinkles.
Right. Yeah, I have clients, who I was on the phone with with a company that does their marketing, and they got the warning letter and they're like, how do we remove this from the internet? Because anytime someone searches our name, it pops up. And unfortunately, unless you can get a closeout letter, which is not very easy to do, you're going to be up there. And for influencers, we all know your brand is probably going to live on the internet, let's be honest. And so you don't want that your your homepage comes up and right there you see an FDA warning letter, whether you've taken the actions to fix it or not, because no
Yep.
one's going to know what actions you've taken. And so essentially that's going to live there. So I think like from a reputation standpoint, that's absolutely something important to consider. And
And
we
that's
can, yeah,
from
go
the
ahead.
FDA standpoint, right? Because we're not even getting into the Federal Trade Commission standpoint and their little watchdog, the National Advertising Division of the Better Business Bureau.
Yep.
So, from the FTC standpoint, they will hit you with fines and penalties. But the beautiful part that has been happening lately has been it's not even the FTC that's coming after brand owners for the claims that they're making on their marketing material. It's this organization, it's the Better Business Bureau's division called the National Advertising Division. They
Yep.
go out and they find companies who are making claims that this division doesn't believe are substantiated, that there might not be enough proof to justify your claim. So they
Right.
turn around and they issue you a letter. Hey, we're not a government agency. We're not even a quasi government agency. We are an independent company and we're a watchdog. And we don't think that you're making the right claims. And you need to provide us with proof that you have to
Yep.
substantiate all these claims you're making. And if you don't, we're going to put together a nice, pretty file. We're going to hand it over to the FTC. So we're doing the FTC's work for
Yep.
them. And then the FTC is going to hit you with fines and penalties because FDA hits you with a warning letter. And yes, it affects your brand, but people have to find it, right? The FTC hits you where it hurts. They hit you in the pocketbook.
Oh, yeah. Well, and not even to begin on all the plaintiffs' attorneys that are now scanning every product. It seems I'm getting a new topic every week of something plaintiffs' attorneys are coming after companies for in the way of claims. It's happening a lot in the food space. And a lot of it is people are moving into, like you said earlier, like the clean beauty or the better for you food products. And they're making claims that their product is natural when it doesn't meet the definition, but it's on such like a scientific scale that you may not understand it as a brand why. And so you're going to have to be dragged through that court process, which again hits you in the pocket, right? It's going to be a very similar result. And so definitely those are some things that people may not talk about, but those are some other areas where you as a brand can be attacked. 100%.